Today's episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast is brought to you by TCG Player, your source for all your trading card game needs. Please consider using our link in the description for your next purchase, as it helps support the continued refinement of our show. This episode is also made possible through the gracious support of our Patreon members. If you wish to join this esteemed group, simply visit patreon.com/The Mind Sculptors and become part of the SCULPTY family today. And of course, if you prefer a simpler gesture, we invite you to subscribe, leave a like and comment on YouTube, or leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts as a most fitting offering to the ever-watchful algorithm Jesus.
Dude, I finished reading the second book in the Stormlight Archive last night.
Okay.
1,300 pages, that book is. I think I read it in like 9 days.
Goddamn.
If you have an audiobook credit to use, I highly recommend it on the Stormlight Archive. Okay. I'm reading the physical books because I can't do audiobooks. I drift off, but I highly recommend it.
Don't read a lot, but I do occasionally vibe and listen to audiobooks, so that is something I could be interested in, you know.
For me, I can't listen to a story on an audiobook because I will just filter out so much of it.
Okay.
But if it's like a nonfiction book, my brain will pay attention to it. So like the audiobook I'm listening to right now is Children of Ash and Elm. My brain can absorb that information because I'm so used to watching stuff like Crash Course or Extra History or things like that, or even like some other of the like history YouTube channels that are out there.
Okay.
And so like have that in the background while I'm doing something, my brain can absorb that. But if it's a story, my brain is like, wait, what happened? Hold on, I have to rewind. And so it's like I find myself rewinding every little bit. And so I listen to nonfiction and I read fiction.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm not saying it makes sense. It's just that's how my brain works.
You know what? All the power to you, Gal. I think that's you know,
the more you know.
Learn good. Cal, thank you for coming on to our book podcast and bring us, all the new hot tech when it comes to book learning.
Here on the Book Sculptors.
Here on the Book Sculptors, we take one podcast host who's really getting into books right now and one podcast host who is illiterate, and we smash them together and see what can come out. I'm Ian, and I'm happy to be here today, which is what I would have read off a script if I could read.
Oh my goodness. Welcome everybody to the Mind Sculptors podcast. You all have met my illiterate host, Ian. I am the literate half, Cal.
Yes, good.
And together we make one semi-literate person.
Yeah. That's why altars piss me off so much. I don't know what the card is.
That's my shtick, dude.
Oh, yeah.
You forget I'm the one with the weird finicky issues about stuff.
No, you forget I'm illiterate too.
Oh man, thank you all for joining us. Just a reminder that if you like this content and want to continue seeing it, make sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button down below, and leave a offering for our Lord Savior Algorithm Christ. And is it Christ Algorithm or is it because it's Algorithm Jesus? So where does like it would be Algorithm Jesus Christ, right? Because Christ comes after.
Is Algorithm the first name or the last name?
Well, I think it's more of a
you
an
described
honorative
algorithm Jesus, right? So it is an honorific at that point, right? Because it's like Dr. Jesus, right? So like which is my favorite sitcom coming to NBC this fall. We can't figure out what's wrong with him. Have you tried prayer?
So hilariously, one of the things in YouTube Studio. So I read that comment last week, right, where it was something about guys, I'm getting Christian dating apps, ads on your videos now
because of the podcast.
Yes. In YouTube Studio, you know this, you're a YouTube creator. They have like suggestions for like video topics and stuff based on what your comment. Ours is literally like listed in there, like Christian podcast. And I was just like, fucking incredible.
It's probably because we out loud verbally describe ourselves as a Christian podcast.
Yeah. We're your parents' favorite Christian podcast. Favorite scooter. Oh, this was the other story that I had to share as well. Have a little bit of Lime scooter update. I almost forgot about it.
Boom, boom, Lime scooter update.
So, are you familiar with the show Emily in Paris on Netflix?
I am aware of its existence, and I believe my fiance watches it while I'm not in the
room. It is not a show I would generally watch on my own, but it's fine. Yeah. It's like, it's
a show you watch because you're married. Got it.
Yeah. So we're watching it. We're watching the most recent season, and there's an episode where Emily is with this guy she's dating, and they go to Rome. And there's this scene where they're out in the middle, like downtown Rome or whatever. There's a piano out there. They're playing. Doesn't really fucking matter. All of a sudden, my wife starts punching me and screaming, "Caleb, you're not going to believe it. Caleb, you're not going to believe it." I look up at the screen. Fucking Lime scooters in the background of this fucking scene.
God damn it.
Can't escape them, even when in Rome.
Yeah. Amen.
So that is the energy and the temperament that I am bringing into today's podcast. So with that being said, today we are going to be talking about kind of the leftovers, so it were, of your, EDH top 50, what it was that you did on your channel, where you kind of went through the 50 decks that were, high played or whatever on EDH top 16, and how you think the bans affected them. And now we're looking at some stuff that maybe those bans might have helped a little bit, and they didn't have space to really operate.
I want to maybe more consider this like the cards that got unbanned by Dockside leaving. You know what I mean? Like it's more so like this will be like a lot of the word artifact and enchantment on these legendary creatures. You know what I mean? Like
absolutely. And so I have one to start off with. Right off the bat. Right off the bat. I'll go, then you go. I'll go, then you'll go, and we'll just swap it right back and forth. It'll be great.
Little deck swap.
It'll be like we actually prepped. Are you drinking Peep soda?
I'm drinking Polar Seltzer.
Okay, I thought that was a Peep.
I'm from Worcester, Massachusetts, the home of Polar Seltzer.
Okay. I thought that was a Peep on the side of it, and I've seen Peep like soda before, and I was like, Ian.
That is something I would do. I was going to go on a rant about how if you ever catch me in that state, but I was like, no. I'm someone who likes to try things once, actually. So, which may be why my stomach is broken, but that's a story for another time.
Not to get into your gastrointestinal issues, but so the first card that I have here is Shorikai Genesis Engine. Shorikai feels like it's back. Already has a top 16 result, I believe. I believe Evan Pierce got over this past weekend.
Did he make top cut?
I think so. It looked like he had him in top 16 when I looked.
Very cool.
So, I mean, Shorikai definitely feels like a big winner here from my perspective. I'm sure you agree, right? Like, it feels very clearly a big boon
He got 21st place.
21st place. Okay. I saw his name and I thought I saw him in the 16th spot.
It's usually safe to assume that Freedom Waffle does do well at tournaments. Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, what are your thoughts on Shorikai? Like, I think that with this and Scepter and Hullbreaker Horror, like, it's in a good spot.
I mean, I brought Shorikai to a tournament pre-ban, right? Like, I think Shorikai is totally fine. I think I ended up getting 17th in that tournament, and that was with a very raw Shorikai list, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, I've always kind of thought the deck had legs to it, right? I think it's a powerful commander. I think the amount of card draw it gives you and card selection is really, really helpful. I think given the fact that you can now flood the board with your manifold keys and your unwinding clocks and all of your artifacts that you've always wanted to, you don't really have to overpack the deck with answers to very specific dockside related problems, which is something that you had to do in the old version of Shorikai, right? So now you can, actually bring answers to other things in the metagame, right? You can actually not have to consider whether to play anti-ETB creatures, right? Instead, you can just play your, recruiters to go get your displacer kittens and stuff like that, right? Which is something that I always found a little bit of awkwardness with Shorikai, which I really appreciate no longer having.
Right.
So that's really nice to not have that sort of very frustrating interaction between the two things for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, to me, one of the biggest wins for this, in my opinion, is you no longer have to decide if you're going to hedge against Dockside or if you're going to hedge against Oof. You can just hedge against Oof and feel pretty safe about it. Like, I think that was a thing in the past I've noticed in brewing Shorikai has been that it felt like you were going to get burned by one or the other. And you just kind of had to pick which one you thought was, and Dockside was certainly the more prominent one. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when a oof pops up, you're kind of like, well, cool.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely a bit of a pain in the butt for the deck, but at the same time, way more decks could play Dockside than do play oof.
It's true. Very true. Well, what do you got? What are your thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the old grandpa himself, or Urza Lord High Artificer. Not worried about that Dockside feeding anymore, which is great because you kind of wanted ETB effects in Urza, right? You wanted your trinket mages and your trophy mages and things of that nature, that ilk. Urza's gotten some new tools over the past couple of years, so I think there's not really too much to talk about with Urza, apart from the fact that like Dockside go bye bye, Urza happy.
Yeah. Well, and this is also like a deck that can play like back to basics super comfortably, which it was a card that I think like a lot of people shied away from.
Yeah.
Almost entirely because of the fact that it didn't matter, because as soon as a Dockside comes down, you're like, well, okay, my back to basics was super helpful there.
Yeah.
Whereas now, people have these greedy mana bases.
Yep.
I think back to basics, Blood Moon, stuff like that. I mean, Hell Harbinger of the Season, stuff like Urza is probably like, grade A tech.
Yeah, Harbinger and Blue Moon and stuff like that. And you and I have already talked about it here on the podcast. But like we're kind of excited for working with Blue Moon and seeing like what can kind of come from that archetype now that the format no longer has Dockside as the auto bailout function.
Yeah, I think that's very exciting from my perspective. Next card I have here, next commander is, and this is one that necessarily was banned because of Dockside, but it was one that I was very hesitant to play because of Dockside. And that was Ellivere of the Wild Court. That was it. That deck fed the hell out of a Dockside. And now, I mean, and so much of that deck for a long time was what we were just talking about with Shorikai, right? Is you kind of had to hedge against this Dockside and have all of these pieces in there to kind of deal with that.
Yeah.
And now you've just opened up like 10 slots from your deck list. Like,
and like you don't have to shut off your own commander's ETB too, which is really nice, because that was always one of the most awkward parts about it, was that your commander has an ETB and attack trigger, and then people were like, well, I'd rather give up the ETB than lose the game.
Right. Yeah, I think that this is a commander that I mean, even pre-Dockside, I felt was fairly strong. I played against it a few times. I feel like it's like in that, like it occupies a similar position or can occupy a similar position that like Winota used to occupy.
Yeah, I can get behind that.
Yeah. And
because it
so
just does not fold the Bowmasters in the same way, right?
Yeah, it really doesn't. It's an incredibly resilient deck that I have
Yeah.
seen, and I think now the fact that it doesn't have to, play all these anti-ETB and Dockside cards, you now get to just be like
a lot more creative
sweet.
space. Yeah.
Yeah, lots of open real estate.
Yeah, agreed. Also plays Stonies and Null Rods much better than Winota can.
100%.
Nice.
Well, I mean, that's the difference between like a deck that can play dorks and a deck that doesn't have that, right?
Yeah.
Like green makes a huge difference there.
Yep. I have speaking of Urza, let's talk about his favorite car, Liberator Urza's Battlethopter. And this kind of also applies to like every colorless deck, right?
This could just be, like a catch-all.
Yeah, for any colorless
insert all
deck,
colorless here.
But basically, TLDR on those is like, yeah, they lost a bit of acceleration in these archetypes, right? Like that, those decks definitely cared about Jewel Lotus and they definitely cared about Mana Crypt, but they also were like, oh, hey, if we don't hit a Torpor, we just accept death with a swift embrace, right? And that is no longer what they have to do, which is nice. I guess it was Torpor or Karn, right? But like now you actually can play these decks. Now, to what level of success, it's hard to say. We're talking about colorless decks, right? But these decks are at least freed from their goblin shackles for the time being. So that is pretty nice. I think that's a really interesting sort of archetype to explore. I've always wanted to build and play a colorless deck at a tournament. So that's something I will probably do at some point. I personally like EDE from the Fallout set, but I think Liberator is insanely strong. Zuladoc, as we know, top forward 2 events pre-ban. So like there's some colorless nonsense out there.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's doing some cool stuff for sure.
Yeah. So my next one might seem like it's a little out there, but I actually think it's probably super well positioned now. And this might seem a little weird because we did just lose JLo, but I think Yisan has an opportunity to be in a great position. I just saw it top 4 an event over this past weekend. I really like what it's got now with the Pillapala and Marvin combos that are inside of it.
Marvin
That's
is
really cool.
Huge for the deck. Like it like the bans were helpful for Yisan, but Marvin is so big for Yisan.
It
It's
fixes
like
a lot of issues with that deck.
Yeah.
I think Yisan like comes away from this and is put in a place where, okay, the format has slowed down a little bit. Sure, we lost a JLo, but that's not really, central to our game plan to begin with. It just helps us get a little bit faster.
Right.
And, above all of that, we now got some new tools that fit really nicely and layer really nicely with what we're already kind of wanting to do anyhow.
Yeah.
And that just, to me, I feel like that is Yisan has a chance to, in this coming meta game, really bring. I think Monocolor kind of across the board is looking a little bit better now than it did, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago.
I'm not sure if I agree with that notion as much because I think some amount of those decks that were like good mono color players were Jewel Lotus Mana Crypt decks, right?
Right.
But I do think obviously the meta can be more open when there are less like sort of directly oppressive things happening.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I think my thought process here, right, is
Yeah.
when the format is as fast as it was, right?
Yeah.
You don't get the opportunity to, you have to play, if you're going to play a monocolor deck, right? You have to play one that is fast out the gate. So you end up on like Magda or Crick or any of those types of decks, right? Like the mono red storm decks. Now the format is slowed down and you don't have to worry about getting burned by like a Dockside. You are now able to play a little bit of a slower commander because you don't have to worry, and especially a slower commander centric commander, because you don't have to worry about your entire game plan getting, not being able to get it online fast enough.
Yeah,
And I think that's where I see the biggest advantage there, is that like these monocolor decks that maybe weren't as fast as, you know, the Magdas or the Cricks in the past now have room to breathe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole slew of mono blue commanders, right? That are
Oh
like,
yeah.
that I can consider, like, and I can check these off the list as I go and talk about it. But like Arkham Daxon was one I was going to talk about, and Leonardo da Vinci is a potentially one to consider as well from the Assassin's Creed set, or Muzio, which is like the old conspiracy legend, right? Like all these mono
Hell
blue.
Teferi, right? Like I think like
Yeah, I think Teferi got hit hard by the speed, but I do hear you. Yeah.
I think like generally the fact that like, you know, blue is good enough at doing just the control game plan anyway. So if it really wants to just sit back and control the game plan, I think it can do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I don't think that's maybe the best strategy, but I think there's an opportunity there, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. What's your next thought?
I have a bunch of commanders here, so like we definitely will take a while to like get through each and
That's
every one of
fine.
them. But like some of them, like the last couple that I just deleted off my list, like with that quick explanation, like there's definitely some that are just like they say play a lot of artifacts, and before that was bad. um and so like there's definitely a number of them. There's definitely some worth highlighting. I really think Miria from the Dominaria set, which was one that I remember you and I were pretty excited about when that was first spoiled.
Yeah.
And one that I worked a lot on with Surreal. That commander's whole thing was that Dockside was just actually not good for it in general, right?
Yeah.
So I do like this idea that with this commander now, is actually like just way more interesting, and I think you can play it as like a creature combo list. You can play it as a very artifact heavy list. Like
Right.
I think it's pretty interesting in that way. I think it's like there's you know some reasons to look at it as like a snoop potential, all that kind of stuff. You know.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, I think that's like super fair. I think one deck that I'm also kind of curious on is like Heliod Ballista potentially, as another deck that I'm like, hey, that feels like it has a little bit more oomph
Like
to it.
yeah.
Between like new combos that have come out that can layer over top of some of the stuff, and now again, I think this is a huge deal. You don't have to hedge against a dockside coming down, and I can't underscore how important it is for these low color artifact decks to not have to hedge that way, right? Like, no, I just think like mono white in general, there are a lot of those. Like I actually looked at Teshar, I looked at Oswald, and those were both.
I was thinking about Teshar too. I was like, Teshar's whole thing was it was like, I mean, it's still fragile as fuck, right? Like it's Teshar. But the whole thing with Teshar is that it's like zooming or dooming. Like there's no in between, you know?
Yeah. You're either going all in or you're not. And now you don't have to you're not worried. You don't have to play some of those like awkward stacks pieces that the deck really doesn't want to play.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to worry about getting burned by a dockside. Like, it's just, I know I've said this a lot on the show, but it's amazing how open the format gets when you take out dockside. What do you got for me?
We talked about artifacts a decent amount, but enchantments are also kind of back, right? Like the brand new Master of Keys, I think everyone's sort of slowly realizing that card's kind of real, which has been pretty cool to hear people have brews. I've heard a lot about Sithises in the
I have seen a handful of Sithises.
Yeah, Sithai are coming out from underneath the floorboards, which I think is kind of interesting. That deck is, you know, does it still lose to an overloaded Cyclonic Rift? Yes, absolutely it does. But that's
you can say that about most decks, right?
Yeah, that's very fair. That's very fair. But I think Sithis does a really good job of like patiently positioning itself, and like you do have this sort of inevitable plan in the command zone, right? Like you're gonna play enchantments and it's gonna get you through your deck, and that will eventually win you the game, right? And so there's a decent amount of impactful things you can do. I think the biggest thing with a deck like Sithis is going to be finding what pieces of interaction you can use that keep you alive in those tough scenarios, right? Like like what are your free spells? What are your pieces of interaction that you can do that aren't just going to eat the first swan song or whatever it might be, right? Like how do you get around that type of stuff, right?
Yeah, it really is a bummer that like you can't play like Alice or a Shepherd, right? Like really is a bunner. But I guess that's where like Destiny Spinner ends up being like kind of good, but it still gets eaten by a dock.
They can play Allosaurus Shepherd. Wait a minute.
They can. It kind of sucks, but
sure. I mean, it's like half the deck they're protecting, but yeah, I get you.
Yeah, I think like Sith is really interesting as far as like where you could put it potentially. Another deck that I'm kind of interested in seeing what it does now without a dockside around, and less because of the dockside, mostly because of the fact that the format has slowed down by like a turn, is like Gitrog, right? I don't know where it lands or if it lands, right? But it is a deck that I think prospers when you slow the game down, right? Like because it's just very good. Like again, like you were saying with Sithis, right? That like amount of inevitability with Gitrog, where it's just like it is going to do the thing eventually. And if you give it enough, room to do that, it will just go right down your throat with it.
I don't think that Gitrog's a winner here, and so like obviously like losing Jewel Lotus Mana Crypt,
that's huge.
Kind of a strike against it, right?
Yep.
The big thing apart from that too is that like I'm hearing a lot of people going back to like people were getting really greedy about like Drannith Magistrate and cards like that, right? And I don't think, with a bunch of TNT coming around and Tivits coming back into the swing of things and decks like that, like I don't know that Gitrog dodges those Dranniths anymore, right? And that is a deck that needs that frog real damn bad. You can really play your command beacons and stuff like that, but like it's still a very real part of the deck is what happens when you don't have the frog, because it's the answer is I don't do anything.
I sit here and just do this number. Just sit there and flick my cards. I don't know. It's one of those decks that feels like whenever you open up the playbook a little bit, it has an opportunity to do something. But no, I totally get it. Another deck that I'm kind of interested in just generally is a deck like Hollan, right? I'm interested to see how or if it does anything, right? Hollan was a commander that I think was a touch too slow. And I think part of that is like if you look at these old lists, right? Like you look at Joking's list, or you look at Justice, Joking and Justice had their deck together, their primer. If you look at Spleen Face's list, right? You're playing these Null Rod, Stony Silence packages in them because you're not wanting to get burnt by Dockside. And I don't know that you need to do that anymore. And I think that opens up some of the playbook. Is that necessary? It was already a deck that, yes, losing Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt hurts, but that's not the primary way that it's making it, doing its thing to begin with. Hollan feels like a deck that has a lot of potential, especially in a format where people are not playing hard counters, right? Like people are playing a lot of, their Spell Pierces and their Swan Songs and, Flusterstorms. They're not playing Counterspell and Mana Drain and Delay.
Not a lot of 2-mana counters and therefore not a lot of answers to creatures in the meta as much as we think. And a lot of people who are seeing, the Docksides going are playing even less than they were playing, which is not a lot in the first place, right? So creatures hitting the stack is pretty interesting. I mean, it definitely suffers from the same drain I think we talked about. I don't know that like Dockside going away means that Hollan doesn't play at least Oof, right? Because that at least,
I think you still play Oof, right?
Yeah.
But I think not needing to, because I think the play pattern that gets opened up here, right, is you sit down at the table with like the red deck. And you're like, all right, I gotta mulligan to get this Oof or this Null Rod or the Stony Silence out fast. Otherwise, I'm just going to lose to this. Whereas now you get a moment and you can actually mulligan to a hand that advances your game state instead of needing to react to whatever decks you're seeing, right?
Right.
I think that to me feels like the biggest win out of it for, all of that being said. But
yeah. No, that's super interesting.
Yeah. Maybe I'm full of shit. I don't know. I'm willing to be wrong. Just Dice, if you're listening, I know you're listening. Tell me if where Hollan's at. I know you're updating your list. What decks you got any more? Give me some more decks from your list there.
Ian. Yeah. I mean, shout out to Phoenix. I want to talk about Ygra, Eater of All, right? Phoenix spent a lot of time working on this deck right when Bloomborough first came out.
Yeah.
I don't know. We talked about the other day. I can't remember what he said. He's kind of like middling on it at the current moment, but I think this commander
is currently winter pilled.
He's
the
very
real
winter pilled. Yeah, that is. He's very, very much in the winter train. But Ygra has a lot of really interesting, weird combos that you can do, and you can you can shut off everybody's creatures with like a collector roof and stuff like that. There's a lot of like really wild stuff you can do with Ygra, and I think it's all pretty interesting. And I think there was just like kind of no way before where you were like, okay, like
I don't need to turn
every
all
creature
the creatures
into every creature on the board is a food, meaning it feeds a Dockside. But don't worry, guys, it's never gonna happen, right? Which is not the case anymore.
Yeah.
Now, I think this deck's actually like if it was ever going to be playable, it's playable now. Now that glaring downside is omitted.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. I think that's a huge win for it, and that's a deck that like in our group chat we've talked about quite a bit. And it's one of those things where I think that is another deck that also benefits from the like extra turn a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other aspect to all of this, because I think it's really easy to just like look at the like, well, does it have to react to Dockside, right? And I think there's like, that's one axis, right? Like you have the the one axis, and then the other axis I think is like, well, how fast does this deck need to be now?
Right.
And I think that's like a huge win, is it doesn't need to like be right out of the gate super fast, which also plays better because now, because of that, you aren't throwing it onto the board, making everything a Dockside feeder too fast.
Right.
So it just is a little bit of that self-fulfilling prophecy there, where I think it just is in a better position.
Yeah, I completely agree.
One commander that I've been thinking about a lot, and I think I've mentioned this a couple times, but Breya in this new format.
Yeah, you mentioned Breya.
I've mentioned Breya a couple times. Feels like a deck that the people who are wanting to do the like Turbo Tymna Crom thing might like Breya better. Just because its commander is a little bit more relevant, right? Maybe I'm wrong. But with Crom feeling like it's not super playable right now, and Tymna being, I've never seen very many of these turbo T and K players really do much with Tymna. I feel like having a win con in the command zone might be more up their alley.
I think I just vehemently disagree with you here.
Okay.
Yeah,
Tell me why I'm wrong. I'm willing to be wrong.
The assessment of where Tymna and Crom is right now is mostly where I take issue with this. I think Tymna Crom is still doing fine, right? Like I think maybe the how bad Crom looks right now is maybe where I'm taking the most issue with it, and Tymna in particular is still fine. Like there's
I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying that like T&K pilots just generally, especially the ones who are doing the more turbo stuff, have never been super into casting Tymna to begin with.
Right. But yeah, I don't think the Tymna Turbo Blue Farm version is like a thing right now, which is fair, right? Like I think a lot more of it is just the set up your value engines and grind with Blue Farm as opposed to that kind of thing. And I think like if you're gonna play Breya, you're gonna play Breya because it's an outlet,
right?
And the only outlet that it gets over the Stranger Things pairings, which come down on the board sooner, turn on your Mox Amber, turn on your Calling the Weak, turn on your Flares and Forces and stuff like that. The only extra thing you get is Auriok Salvagers, and the question is then like, is that worth it, basically, right?
Right.
Which is why I do think the Stranger Things pairings are something to pay attention to, like especially the Will Lucas deck. Your other decks aren't having their Fierces and their Forces online nearly as early, right? So that is genuinely something that deck now has as a major advantage, right? And you can still play, like, you lost your Dockside lines, but you still have Hullbreaker lines in the deck, right? So you just play one big 7-drop, and then the rest of the deck is the same sort of low to the ground blue farmy nonsense that the other decks have access to, right?
Yeah, no, that's super fair. I don't know. Breya is one of those decks that I always feel like has a little, you know, for our sports fans out there. To me, it feels like Joe Flacco, where you think Joe Flacco's just he's not going to be good anymore, but every time he comes back, another great season out of the old guy, the 40-year-old. Other decks that I've kind of been thinking about too is like Aminatou, the Fate Shifter.
Yeah,
seems kind of interesting. I know you talked about Zur on your episode where you guys talked about that. I think like those types of decks in general feel like they're in an interesting spot.
Yeah,
and I think like Aminatou, again, being a deck that primarily benefits from the format slowing down a touch. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Aminatou's always weird because it's never card advantage, right? It's just like, I do broken stuff with the ability to blink, right? And it's like, it's a weird deck. I do think it's better now, but I don't know that saves it from the general obscurity that I think it gets locked into, right? Like, at the end of the day, I hate comparing it against a Timnun, where I'm just like, oh yeah, Aminatou's not looking too great just because it can out of time twice. Like,
it's not a bad thing though.
Yeah. I think honestly, I'm more excited about new Aminatou than
new Aminatou's pretty sweet.
Yeah. Which I did add to my list is new Aminatou, because I think miracling out enchantments is pretty sick. I think there's
really I don't know. I think miracling out enchantments sounds pretty terrible. It's pretty boring to me. What else? What else are you thinking over there?
All right, going back to me. I know we talked about Blue Moon a little bit earlier. Thinking about my good dragon friend Galazeth Prismari. I think that deck is looking way more interesting. The win lines are still a little bit more complicated with Galazeth, right? But
a little weird, a little kooky,
a little funky, yeah. But like the fact that it now has double moon support, the fact that it already has the Urza text where it can shut off a Trinisphere or a Winter Orb or a Static Orb and all that kind of stuff on its own turns, means that the game, like, the problem with the deck isn't stopping other decks. It does that real damn well, right? The problem with the deck is going to be turning the corner and what is the most efficient way of doing so, right? And figuring that out from
how do you win this game?
Yeah. No, you don't get me wrong. You've stopped us sufficiently, but how do you win?
How do you win?
I think it might literally end up being the classic Talion thing, which is like, yeah, you can't technically win with Hullbreaker Horror, but I'm going to put 30 things in here that mean that you do win with Hullbreaker Horror, so that I just play this giant squid and you're dead. I feel like that's the win con.
it's the classic. I can't play this on MTGO deck.
Yes, it's exactly the classic. Okay, which is most of everything we will talk about today.
Yeah, honestly. What do you think about? I know we've talked about the rectors a decent bit.
Yes,
on this format or on the format. Jesus, in this channel. What do you think about Naya Minsk, like OG Minsk?
I do think that card is probably better positioned nowadays.
I mean, I like it more than Rocco personally. Personally, I do. And I think that's just because the commander is it's the same reason why I like Tivit over, like Timna Malcolm, right? Is the reason I like Tivit is because it's the win con access and the command zone. Yeah. And I think that's the same reason I like Minsk is it's technically not win con, but it's like, it's part of half of the combo, right? And so it's just like, it's really easy to do that, get that down. You get to play both Arena Rector and Academy Rector. I like, it's 3 mana. So it's already it's an easier deck to just go land, dork, pass, play it on your next turn.
Yeah.
And that is a real way of winning to me. Like,
yeah, no, it's very clean to just, quote, send it, right? Like it's a deck that does that quite well. So, I mean, I actually have zero qualms with that deck coming back. Still a little susceptible to the old bow boy, but who's to say what happens next? I do think that deck could position itself pretty decently, though. I think there's potential there for sure.
And I think one of the things that's nice about it, with regards to the Bowie boy, one might say David Bowie.
David Bowie, yeah, there it is. Okay, I knew I could see it cooking.
The one thing Minsk does have in its corner is the fact it's a 3/3, which we've talked about on this podcast plenty with like all sorts of different commanders, right? That having more like an X2 and X3 in the Bowmasters world is prime real estate.
Yeah, that's not the problem though. It's the fact that the Boo has 1 toughness and the mana dorks that are going to get you to your turn 2 Minsk have 1 toughness, right? Like that's more of the issue.
Yeah, that is true. The nice thing is that the activated ability can target any creature. So
at sorcery speed.
At sorcery speed, yes. At sorcery speed, but that's fine. It's fine. Don't think about it too hard. It's fine. What else you got cooking over there in that?
I feel like the Brothers War face commanders are both commanders that were held back by Dockside.
I would agree with that.
Cool. I think they each have potential to be commanders to think about. Urza, with the game plan of play some early artifact creatures, stacks the fucking board out, and then this clock of your commander that says, no, every turn I make a construct, this will be annoying. Right?
Read it again. It says every turn.
This is going to keep happening. So that's definitely where I see that one going. Definitely a lot of that sort of energy of stuff where it's like it's nice too because it's a stack deck that can play blue, right? Which is kind of like fill it with counter spells, right? But you play enough so that you don't lose to a Cyclonic Rift, right? Is kind of the idea there. And then Mishra is a really quirky Grixis list. You can do sort of normal Grixis stuff.
He's just kind of a quirky commander.
Honestly. It is a very quirky commander, but there's weird combos that do exist with the commander where you like make a copy of like Gonti's Ether Heart or whatever it is, which is like the weird energy one. Basically, you make a bunch of weird shit happen where you're like making a copy of an artifact that allows you to like make a copy of something that allows you to take extra turns and stuff like that. And not to mention, like, there is this, and this was displayed by some of the people out in Salt Lake City. There was very clearly shown this, like, not Tinker, but basically like Welder, Citadel, Grixis core thing that people could do. But it was so susceptible to Dockside that it was always compared to the regular Grixis core, and people were like, why would we go through all these hoops, right? But now that that's not the case, this sort of like grindy Welder core, I do think is actually something kind of really interesting in the Grixis space and something worth exploring,
Yeah, fully. I could certainly agree with that. I think the biggest thing with both of those commanders that'll hold them back a little bit is the commander cost. I think that the way that those decks play where they want their commanders out doing stuff, I think is a knock against them. And I know that people will be like, but Cal Tivit. And again, I'll say these aren't finisher commanders, right? Like these are commanders that you want to have out, especially Urza. And I think that's the only concern I have with them. But overall, I think that this is a really cool idea. I like the way that I like the cut of your jib, good sir. A deck that I have not thought about in nearly a fortnight. Brago, King Eternal. That's a deck that just has a really clean 2-card combo. That kind of just fed the shit out of a Dockside.
Yeah.
And because of that, it just kind of drifted back into obscurity. And that, I think that's a deck that wins here because you get to have a lot of these pieces that, previously you were kind of moving away from. But I mean, like the Strionic Resonator combo is like a real thing. Like I have lost to that a lot. Also the reality acid thing, like shenanigans you can do with it.
Yeah, I don't know if I believe in reality acid, but it's
a card that you play in the deck, right?
Yeah,
like because it regardless of how good it is, as a main game plan, it's still pretty good removal.
There's a second Strionic Resonator too, whose name is escaping me, for 4 mana. So it is nice that you do have redundancy. For that, like, 1 card win effect. I'll never call Brago clean, right? It's a commander that definitely has a decent amount of stuff that it requires to have set up, but when it gets
Lithoform Engine is the other one you're talking about.
Thank you. When Brago gets set up, it's an impressive engine. It really is. And now knowing that you have the luxury to be able to develop your artifacts and enchantments, I do completely agree. Is a really big up for Brago, because that was always sort of the thing, because you'd then overcommit into the creature plan to not feed Dockside, but then you get blown up by Bowmasters or a board wipe or a deluge or whatever it might be, right? So there's some really interesting stuff here with Brago. And once again, like, you have a counterspell to defend against the Culling Rituals, against the Cyclonic Rips and stuff like that, which is all really nice too.
It's interesting how when you take like one of those elements out, right, where you have to worry about which thing you're going to get blown out by, it makes it a lot easier to not get blown out by the other thing, right?
Exactly.
Brago, definitely one that I'd like to see if it has an opportunity to, come back and assert itself. Another commander that I know we talked about this a few weeks ago during our set review because it got a new card, but Orvar's another commander that I just think feels like it isn't poorly positioned. It's not a deck that I think is, super sexy right on the face of it, right? It is Fear of Imposters was the card that it got, right? That you get that, and you already had like the fairy spell, right? That countered depending on how many fairies you had. I couldn't remember the name of it in that episode. What'd you say?
Spell Stutter Spray?
Yeah, Spell Stutter Spray. And so you now get both of these things. Do really disgusting things with Orvar. You're going into this metagame where everybody's kind of playing these value engines, and Orvar is really good at copying and taking value engines.
Exceptionally so. Yeah, absolutely.
That's one of the things that I've thought about, and it maybe that's cope. I'm willing to admit that, but I think I
see you've been hanging out with the youths.
I see that I've been this as a fellow youths say. But I don't know. It's a deck that I feel has more legs underneath of it now than it did, a month ago.
Yeah. No, I hear you on that. I do. I think it's kind of interesting. I think, a little bit of time, a couple extra pieces here and there. Like, I think it's worth exploring. There's a lot of commanders I think a lot of people gave up on that were just like fine, but they weren't bad, right? Now Orvar did lose a little bit of kick. Lost some speed for it. So I think the opening hands are a little bit more awkward in Orvar. Because it is very commander focused. And
it is very
have Orvar focused. Online. It's a little Akko Taco. So I'm interested to see if that picks up a little more speed.
I'm just looking at the cards that it's gotten in this deck recently, because I'm looking at the primer that like Noobzors and all of them did. And just to name a few of the new cards that it's got: Polywog Prodigy, Volatile Stormdrake, Fear of Imposters, Tashana's Tidebender, Roaming Throne. Where was the other new card? Sea Double, Strict Serenade, we're just in the other big one, and I think this is the big one, is Amphibian Downpour, which is gross in that deck.
Yeah, Amphibian Downpour also big winner from this.
Yes,
last week.
That card just straightforwardly feels significantly better now.
Yeah.
But yeah, Orvar is a deck that I think has a little bit more legs. That it lost a little bit of height. Maybe the heels. It's not wearing stilettos, just some pumps, but that's okay. Yeah. What else? You got any more for me over there?
Any convoluted metaphors or any
decks? Well, I'll take either.
Okay, cool. Yeah, Orvar lost its running sneakers, but it still has some nice joggers kind of. I think both Jhoiras are huge winners here, right?
Which feels unintuitive to say, right? Because you would think that Weatherlight Captain got worse, losing Dockside and all that stuff. But believe it or not, it just kind of went, okay, I played without Dockside in Jewel Lotus. I can play with you know what I mean?
And don't get me wrong, like 4-mana Jhoira losing Crypt and J-Lo definitely made it uncomfortable for that deck, for sure.
100%.
But now they can sort of actually take the time to put artifacts on their board and make it so that when they finally play Jhoira, they get to go, cool, zoom in, we get to go. Because before you had to basically sandbag every artifact that you had, so that when you went for it, you could just go artifact, right? And not feed Dockside. But that is no longer the case. And 2-mana Jhoira, I think, is the biggest one, because that is literally a deck meant to go stick a big artifact on the field, stick a big artifact on the field, stick a big artifact on the field. And at some point, your opponents go, oh, nice God Pharaoh statue. Here's the Dockside. Fixed all my problems.
Portal to Phyrexia.
Exactly. So I think 2-mana Jhoira is looking much
yes, 100%.
Post bans for sure.
And I also think about like some of the things that like 4-mana Jhoira gets here, and I think this is a combo that I kind of didn't think about that deck got that really works really well. Is Glaring Fleshraker is like a weirdly amazing card for that deck.
Yeah, for the top combo.
Yeah, that's a big one. I'm pretty excited about that. What do you think about where was it? I had it and I lost it. God damn it. What do you think about I had it and I lost it? God damn it.
I feel like it's not as well positioned in the meta as it might sound,
Yeah.
Because when you have it and then you lose it, you really want to have a little more grace than God damn it. And I think God damn it really throws it off in the current meta,
God damn it's like its own metagame.
Right.
It really does just.
I actually think I preferred God damn it before the bans.
Incredible. Let me bring you back to an oldie. This is what it was. How do you feel about Tasigur these days?
What hath the Banana Man gained?
What hath it gained?
What hath gained the Banana Man? Yeah.
I don't know. It's just, listen. We're going back. It feels like we're going back to pre-2018.
Yeah, I want to caution that mentality, because I don't think that that's necessarily
it's not necessarily true.
Yeah, I think it's definitely different nowadays. I think there's definitely decks that are fine. Sultai as a color is like, you can't say it's strictly worse anymore. It doesn't mean it's like strictly better than everything else, right? But like, you can't just go be like, oh, well, Sultai is worse than Grixis right now, right? There is a subtlety to that conversation nowadays, right?
Well, yes, you can play subtlety in that deck.
Yes, you can also play subtlety in both. Yeah, but I don't exactly know what the Banana Man is sitting here rocking. That's making me go, oh yeah, it's Tasigur's time. You know what I mean? Like, it's not. Yeah, I don't even know if I can say the sentence "it's Tasigur's time" with the straight face, but that's due to also just years of history of shit posting on that deck. So like, I don't know.
That's super fair. That's super fair.
Listen, if you want to whip out your Ian Malcolm Tasigurs, it's now is the time, I guess. But yeah.
What about Lonus, Cryptozoologist?
Easy winner. Yeah. Huge.
Yeah, that was a deck that really felt like it never got to develop because of...
I think both Lonuses, ironically.
Yes.
The Cryptozoologist and the one from the Clue set. I think both of them are just, very artifact-heavy decks that sort of just caught the Dockside strays quite a lot, right?
Yeah.
So this is a big win for any Lonus enjoyers.
Now, here's the big one.
Okay. The big one.
Greasefang, Okiba Boss. Believe it or not, I actually think he's better positioned now for two reasons.
Sure. I need all of this.
Okay.
I need all of the explanation.
Okay. So full, like straightforwardly, and I do mean this in full sincerity, I do think it's better positioned.
Yes.
Part of that is because of the fact that Dockside was a huge thing that you had to deal with. Obviously, with that deck, it is a very artifact focused deck as well as a very vehicle focused deck. And when you have, which are artifacts, yes. And when you have such a harsh, way to get punished by a Dockside, you basically have to either have Null Rod or Stony Silence in your deck, which doesn't play great with your deck. In order to answer that. Now you don't have to worry about that. So your deck just kind of functions fundamentally better straight off the board. The other thing is is that, again, this is where I come back to the format being a turn slower gives some of these decks that might not have had room to breathe an opportunity. Not necessarily saying that this is going to come up and make waves or that it's definitely worth your time. But I do think that with this opportunity to breathe and get like a chance to get a foothold, this is a deck that can really benefit in that, because not only does it hit like a fucking truck, it has an opportunity. It's able to play the stax game very well.
What do you do with it, though?
What do you mean? What do you do with it?
What do you do with Greasefang? Like, what do you do with the deck? Like, it I don't accept the answer Parhelion 2. Well, like, that doesn't...
that is part of it, but like if you go back and look at the list, I have to go and find my old list here. But a lot of it is just like black white stacks almost. That's just really good at closing the game out, similar to like a way that like it reminds me of Ellivere in that way, right? Where it has like that stacks game plan and then has a very clear way of how it's going to beat you outside of the stacks game plan, right? And I think that it doesn't have to be like, okay, then I'm doing this other thing, right? Like it's just very much like I'm going to play stacks and this. And again, like I'm not saying that this is earth shattering here, but mostly that, perhaps it has an opportunity, one might say, to make something happen.
A completed list from you.
That's fair.
And make my judgments then, because right now I don't know what I'm searching for appeal in. You know what I mean? Like what am I looking for that I would like? But that's because I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Super fair. That is a deck that I had
Warhammer gave it a lot of cool vehicles.
Yes, it did. Warhammer gave it a lot of cool vehicles. Then there were good vehicles in Kamigawa, obviously, because it came from that set. Yeah. And then we've gotten a couple interesting like black vehicles since then too. But I have to try and dredge up this list. I'm having a hard time finding it. Yeah. So I have like a zillion fucking...
Listen, if you do, Lua will be the happiest person in the world. I'll let you know.
Listen, Greasefang is one of my favorite like cards in the game. Like I just think it's a really neat, and I love Buicks. So it's just a card that I would, maybe it's cope, and I'm okay with that. I'm willing to, me. I'm all about that copium, but any more from you before we wrap up here?
We covered a lot of the big ones for me. I think, like I talked about in my video, Tameshi is a huge winner here.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's some other like quirkier decks out there. Like I think Tatsunari is a card to maybe just like look at again. Bellow from the new Bloomburrow set's another one that's kind of interesting now that you don't have to worry about Dockside nearly as much. So I think there's a bunch of quirky little decks that are very, very much were relying on their permanence and got punished by those permanents. So it's some interesting stuff, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. Well, with that being said, I think, the format looks interesting in that there's a lot of stuff that has opportunity to kind of to come out and make some room for itself, which I think is really exciting. After a couple weeks, what's your feeling on the lists or the decks so far, and what you're seeing out there in the wild?
I mean, it's only week 2, right? But so far people are bringing interesting decks and doing stuff with them. Like just went to a tournament that had a Yisan in the top 4 and Galarb won the whole thing. That's everything I could want as a brewer is to see that is where the format is landing. I saw an Emil deck in another tournament that made top 16 last weekend. I think there's just like a lot of really cool stuff going around, right? So like look out for cool decks, because they are aplenty. And
look out, because here I come.
Yeah. And thank you, Cal. But yeah, I mean, literally we had a Roxanne and a Rakdos Lord of Riots, Wise Mothman, all the tournament I went to this last weekend, right? Which is like, that says enough to me, right? Like the format's in a good space if that's where we're at. So happy to be here.
Yeah, 100%. Well, that being said, if people want to receive some of that good Ian coaching, so it were, how could they do that?
If you wanna take some of these crazy decks out here in the format right now, and you wanna get coaching on them, you can hit me up at comedianmtg@gmail.com. It's the easiest way. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at comedianmtg and on comedian_mtg. Over on Discord. Remember, once again, Discord is comedian_mtg if you want to find the real me. But yeah, if you're ever interested in cEDH coaching, want to brew some of these new decks, you want to take that level up competitively in the new meta, find me any of those places.
Yeah. And if you want to support us here on the Mind Sculptors, you can head over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors. We greatly appreciate any support you are willing to give us, as that helps continue to, make this podcast possible. If you would also be so willing as to give us a like and a comment, we are very close to hitting our 10,000 subscriber goal. We're actually rapidly approaching 10,000 subscribers. We are at 9,817 as of time of recording. So, if everybody watching this video hit that subscribe button, we would get there in no time. And we would deeply, deeply, deeply appreciate it. Deeply. With that being said, before we leave, I just want to address one thing here. Ian, the what is the German word for balloon?
Okay, so if you stumble into being correct, that doesn't mean you're correct. If I misread a word and then it happens to also translate to that word in another language, that doesn't mean that I
didn't misread. Well, I guess I did misread it. No, here's what you don't understand is I'm just so far ahead of the curve. I just auto-translated it in my head. I was just doing our fans a service, so that they would understand what they were seeing.
Callahan, fan service master.
Yeah, I'm a man of the people.
Anyways, Cal got lucky. This has been the Mind Sculptors. We'll catch you next time. Bye.
Stay sculpty, everybody.